Welcome to the Spiritual, Sexual, Shamanic Podcast, exploring sacred sexuality, activating life force, and empowered transformation. These intimate conversations take you under the sheets with faculty from ISTA, the International School of Temple Arts. I'm your host, Ria Yoshida, faculty and organizer with ISTA. Welcome to the show. Today, as always, we have an incredible guest, Raffaello Manacorda, who is an ISTA lead facilitator. So I'll go ahead and give you the bio. So Raffaello Manacorda is an international Tantra teacher and Dhaka, sacred sexuality practitioner. He has been practicing Tantra for more than 15 years and has undergone intensive training in several styles of yoga. After completing an MA in philosophy, Raffaello decided to spend more than 12 years living in alternative communities and experimenting with radically alternative lifestyles. It was in these wild years that he first encountered Tantra, the rebel way to spirit. This encounter developed into a lifelong practice, first on a solo journey, then studying Tantra and yoga in some of the best worldwide schools. Raffaello serves as lead faculty in ISTA, the International School of Temple Arts, and teaches and lectures worldwide. He is currently enrolled in a PhD program in wisdom studies with Ubiquity University in California. Raffaello is the co-creator of the ISTA Practitioner Training, PT, ISTA's program for coaches and practitioners in the field of conscious sexuality. So welcome to the show, Rafa, and today's topic is sex and shadow work. Tell us about that.
All right. So first of all, thank you, Ria. It's so amazing to read this very interesting bio of somebody read by your amazing voice. And oh, that's me. Right. Yeah, it is actually me. But just for some reason, when you read it, it seems so amazing and so interesting. And I'm so happy that, we have this space where we can speak about whatever we want pretty much, and things that really turn me on and interest me deeply. And out of all of them, sex and shadow work is like one of the big ones. It's actually two themes in one, isn't it? Because sex, sure, I mean, probably everybody who's listening to this is interested in sex in one way or another, from one angle or another. And then shadow work, which may be perhaps a bit less common for people to hear about, but I believe firmly it is a necessity for everybody to look into if we want to really, have more of a human experience and lead a fuller life with more of us present to it. So both of them together, and they're very connected, as I hope to clarify together with you today. It's a winner. It's two things in one that for me make up a lot of what I'm passionate about and a lot of what I practice and teach.
Beautiful. Yes, we can't wait to hear it. So why don't we just start with, where do you feel the most juice about this? What do you really want the listener to get when it comes to sex and shadow work?
Well, maybe, like the first thing I would love everybody to get is that unless you are willing in one way or another to look at the conundrums of sex and shadow, then then life is not going to be worth living. It's going to be a facade. It's going to be a farce. Because these two things are an integral part of life, and yet both of them, for different reasons, sexuality and the shadow, are hidden largely. And so to not want to look at them, to not want to, I don't particularly love the word work with them, because it can be a lot of fun, but to address them, to move them, to explore, it means basically, living a partial life. And who the heck wants to do that? I just can't believe anyone would like to do that. But this thing may sound really simple the way I presented it, and it is simple, but then for a number of reasons, we all live immersed in cultures that go to a tremendous effort to deny and hide both sexuality and anything that is part of the so-called shadow. So, it's an exciting thing to do, and it's not without issues and problems and resistances when we're willing to look at sex and shadow, but then it opens up so many possibilities.
Yes. And simple doesn't mean it's easy.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly.
So tell us, how can we, let's say we're bought, we're sold, we're in it. We want to live a full life. We're not settling for this partial life that we're born into, the culture that tells us how to be. So how do you work with this resistance?
So, in theory, the answer could be a one-liner, right? So just be fully yourself and be fully transparent with yourself, which means don't fool yourself. When you wake up in the morning and you have a thought about somebody or a feeling about somebody, and there is a part of you that says, oh my God, I really shouldn't be thinking this, I shouldn't be feeling this is horrible, this is not me. And then, in one way or another, you hide it, you forget it. Well, don't do that. Be fully present with those feelings and thoughts and emotions, whether they are sexual in nature or sometimes aggressive or sad or joyful, whatever it is, that it just doesn't feel appropriate to the moment, to the context, to the role you're playing. Just be brutally honest with yourself. But that's easier said than done. And because a lot of the repressions and constrictions around sex and shadow are built in groups, in community, and first and foremost, of course, in the first community that most of us meet and have to deal with, which is family, then a lot of the unraveling of that actually needs to happen in groups and needs to happen with others. So that's the way to do it. Then there are many different ways, and I have some suggestions and some, ways that I've tested with myself, of course, and in groups. But the impulse at the base of it, in my feeling, has to be a radical honesty with oneself, a real willingness to know this mysterious human that I am, that you are, that is full of light and dark, of spirit and matter, of the most elevated thoughts and the most primal basic urges. But that's the full human that we are. So that curiosity, that excitement, that willingness, that expansion of the heart as well, which is able to be compassionate with oneself and say, hey, I'm all of this, and yet this is it. This is what it is to be human, is the radical way to go about it. And once we start to look into sex and shadow work, inevitably some moments will come when we're like, oh fuck, I really don't want to admit to myself and to others that I have that desire or fear or that lust or that rejection, repulsion towards someone or something or myself. But actually, as Carl Jung said famously, to become enlightened or to just develop as a human being is not about cutting out our shadow. It is about, or he said, about constructing figures of light. It is about embracing all that we are within consciousness and within a loving acceptance of what we are. And that's really a lifetime's job. Fortunately, it's also fun and in many ways, enticing and tickling. But it is a lifetime job to be done in groups and in communities.
Yes, and it's a path of the brave.
It is. It's totally a path of the brave. Although, look, I'll be honest. Just like, for me at least, it came to a point a couple of times in life where there is no other choice. Because what are we going to do otherwise? Are we going to go on forever and ever putting masks and playing, roles that are acceptable in society? This is, by the way, the reason why sex and shadow work are so connected and why I decided together with you to kind of like make a bundle of them. Because so much of our unseen, so much of our shadow, which literally means, the part of ourselves that we don't see or are not willing to look at, so much of it revolves around sex and the impulses, the desires, the fears, the longings, the shame, the guilt, and all of that that we learn to construct around our sexuality.
Yes, I love that. So, for some of you listening right now, you might be in a really great place in life and you might be willing to embrace taking a look at yourself. And for others of you, you might be backed into a corner. Life will present herself to you in mysterious ways where you get to embark on going much deeper into embracing, right? So, for example, rape fantasies. There's a lot of us have them and we don't talk about it, we don't embrace it because, oh no, what does this mean about me? And something I'm working on in my shadow is this know-it-all. The one who's righteous, who wants to know everything and have, like, you know, the smartest answers to show off. So tell us, Rafa, what's in your shadow?
Okay, I'll go there in a minute, but first of all, I would love to say that, you know, when you mentioned rape fantasies, just to make a little commentary on that, which is because there is, to a certain degree, perhaps a little bit more acceptance now in that people of both genders, obviously, can have rape fantasies, as in fantasize to be raped. But what about the other side? What about fantasizing to take somebody by force? And we go into a lot of confusion there because we may feel that if I have that fantasy, it means that I'm really, really bad and that I actually might go ahead and do that and you know, violate someone's physical integrity. But and this is one of the you know, the very important points that is proved again and again, that someone who is able to confess to themselves and even perhaps to speak in a safe container that they have a fantasy of raping somebody else, that is a much safer person to hang out with than someone who has that impulse completely in the shadow, unacknowledged, unseen, and then it will most likely pop out when we're distracted, when we're drunk, when we are not present. So just to say that, you know, like, both of those are real, and opening spaces where we can talk about it, when we can share them and perhaps even laugh at them or enact them in a safe way that doesn't actually hurt anybody or ourselves, is tremendously healing. But you were asking about my shadow, and this actually ties in because definitely, you know, part of my sexual shadow, well, or I should say it was a shadow in the past, and then, you know, after a while became very much in the light, and I worked with it and I acknowledged it and so on. It is exactly that, you know, not so much the fantasy to be raped, but the fantasy to take someone by force. And it is true, you know, that at the beginning, I was much younger, I really questioned myself, what was wrong with me? Where did I get that from? Was it a hereditary trait, you know, that came to me down a line, or what was it about it? Was it a, you know, an inferiority complex that I was trying to compensate for? And of course, it was very clear to me throughout that I would never do that, you know, in actual fact. But perhaps I would, you know, get excited thinking about it and masturbate to it, or ask some partners that were, you know, digging that kind of energy to play together. And it took me a long time to actually, first of all, realize that so many other people had a similar or specular mirror image fantasy, but then also just how natural it is. And one way to explain it for me is that as humans, we do have somewhere a longing to experience everything. Everything, you know, not just taking someone by force, but also the opposite, to be taken. So that fantasy, perhaps the one of being raped, is more in my shadow right now, which doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. It's just that I have to dig a little deeper to find it, because there is this capacity and also longing to experience everything, to experience a loss of oneself through tremendous, you know, abandoning to someone else. Why are so many people so much into watching horror movies? Why would you want to watch something that is depicting something terrible and that you would never want really to happen to you, but actually watching it and feeling the sensations of it in a safe space is so exciting for many people, isn't it? So all of that, points to this tremendous capacity of wholeness that we have to experience everything, including pain, in a way that is supportive of our growth. And then, of course, how to make it happen and with whom, and in a way that is actually not harmful but enhancing of our capacity is a whole art. Then, there's so much more that I can say about my shadow. You mentioned the know-it-all. I have it too, but more specifically, there is definitely in me, let's say, a shadow teacher. A part of me that wants to teach people, sometimes in the most inappropriate ways. For instance, with my partners, obviously, in I am in a relationship, and obviously the point of that relationship is not me teaching anybody or me being taught by anybody, but sometimes I can feel myself slipping into that role, and most of the time it's completely unwarranted and unasked for and unhelpful, but it takes someone else to notice, because that's the thing with the shadow. Sometimes we use this word very kind of like generously, but the true core of the shadow is something that we are only faintly aware of, or none at all. But paradoxically, mostly, everybody around us is totally aware of it. So, one of the most courageous things anybody can do, but it takes kind of like a network of courageous friends, is to summon up 5 close friends and just ask them, hey, tell me, what is it that I always do and I'm not aware that I do, and it's really, really annoying to you? And we would just be really surprised, or not perhaps, by what people can reveal about us. And that's the shadow. It's walking alongside us all the time, but every time we turn our head, it disappears.
Yes, it goes in the other direction. It's always behind us. So whenever we look, we can't see our own blind spots, which is essentially this concept of getting into a relationship with your partner. You're almost hiring them, recruiting them to be your shadow stalker with you. And they can see it so much clearly. They can see your potential, they can see your vision, and they can also see your shadow. So good. So I want to talk about how you said, we were born and we're repressed and contracted in groups. And so now you offered us, the listeners, a practice to hire your partner, if you're in a romantic relationship, or hire 5 people closest to you and ask them what's most, annoying that you do, to get that feedback. So let's say you get this, an abundance of feedback. Now what can we do with that?
Okay, so actually, to be more precise, as you said, Ria, in one sense, our partners and more intimate friends are ideal. They see all of our shit. They live with us oftentimes. However, there is a limit to that because they're so involved. So while their vision of our shadow can be spot on, it's not always the best way for us to receive it. That's why I would be careful to encourage people, to really literally transform their partners into their shadow hunters. That will happen anyway. However, it needs, it requires a lot of clarity and precision to slip in and out of that role, because then it's also true that with our partners and friends, we want to just, not be all the time working on our inner conflicts and shadows and whatnot. So those are great sources of potent insights. But then truthfully, I believe the best place and medium to work in our shadow collectively is in containers or groups of people that come together for this specific purpose. In the past, I was really reckless with shadow work, and I prided myself on it, and part of me is still proud of that, just going to, extreme ways. okay, 3 minutes, tell me all the shit that you see about me, and I will just listen and, you know, take it in. It worked for me somewhat, but I also know that for some people that can be really damaging and really kind of like create the opposite effect of contraction and of feeling this is really unsafe. So there are ways to do that with a little bit more grace and gradually than I have done in the past. So, you know, instead of like grabbing your partner and going, tell me what's the worst about me that you can see, you can find a group of supportive people that are able to not just speak about the shadow, for instance, you know, like not just use the sharpness of the mind, but to play with it, to embody it. Like, for instance, you know, put on a nice supportive music, and now everybody, let's dance our shadows and our monsters and our goblins and our werewolves and whatever it is. And that brings humor to it, because it doesn't have to be that serious either, right? There is a funny aspect to that and a humorousness to that. However, what I became increasingly clear of, you know, with life and experience is that there is only so much that we can do alone. Groups are really important. Like sometimes I see people fooling themselves and like, well, you know what, I did a lot of shadow work because every year I go for 2 months alone in a cave and I meditate and meditate and meditate. And that's great. But as you said before, Ria, you can't see what you can't see. You know, a blind spot is called a blind spot because no matter how long and deep you look into yourself, you just can't see it. It takes other people to look at that. And very shortly, you know, like on a biological level, why do we create a shadow in the first place? Is because as infants and children in developing our personality, we learn that some of our personality traits are acceptable to the family and the community, and some are not. You know, when a child steals something from you know, another kid at school or whatever, virtually every parent will say, oh, that wasn't so good. So for us as children, that doesn't land as, oh, it wasn't so good. It lands as, if you do that again, I will withdraw my love for you, which literally means you will starve and you will die. So it is a matter of survival for the growing up human to push those traits into the shadow, to push those traits into the corner where they cannot be accessed anymore. But it doesn't mean that they don't exist. There is a thief, you know, a ghoul, a vampire, you name it, a predator, a rapist, all of that is present in some level, at some level within all of us. But we just learn how to put those things in the shadow so that we can survive as children. And then as adults, we oftentimes need to do a lot of work to just reclaim all that energy back. Because, and this is the last thing in this long stretch that I've been talking, that shadow holds energy. It's not just about, oh, I want to do it because I'm so cool and I want to, you know, be able to post on Facebook that I found my shadow and la la la. The shadow contains energy. So when you eat it, when you recognize it and bring it to the light of consciousness, there is a tremendous amount of energy that we can recover from that.
So powerful. And I really acknowledge you for sharing with us your journey of how, you know, from reckless, you figured out that when you take too much medicine, it can become poisonous. And that when you're doing shadow work or sexual energy, these are powerful energies. And they can really make and break someone. They can really support you, and they can also keep you in your contraction, if you will.
Totally.
Yes. And so, you know, if we really look at evolution and if we look at consciousness and we trace our lineage all the way back, I mean, we're animals. In every single one of us, our ancestors, there was a rapist in there. There was someone who got raped. There was someone, you know, we were violent creatures once upon a time, not that we're not anymore.
Still are.
Still are. And so this is our evolution of embracing consciousness, if you will. We're on this path. And so doing, you know, sex and shadow work can really support us on this journey. And so I love what you
Yes.
said earlier that, the people closest to us have an agenda, right? They still want certain behaviors or ways of being that are going to behoove them because we're so close.
Yes. So thank you for bringing that up. I love that you brought up the theme of evolution, because one thing I would love to drop into this conversation, and of course, we can all have our ideas and theories about where are we going as human race? Is there anywhere where we're going? It's a very deep, interesting question to ask, but I just want to address it from the standpoint that probably many of our listeners, I would assume at least, in some way or another, we have been told that our evolution individually and collectively is from darkness to light. Yeah, that's been on for at least 450 years, since the Enlightenment time, where all of a sudden light became not just one of the polarities on a spectrum, dark and light, hot and cold, etc., but an end, an objective. And I would like to propose, or kind of like to invite the consideration of something a little bit different. If there is any, sort of like direction to evolution, which is open to questioning and open to consideration, but in my feeling, there is a direction. We can feel when we grow as individuals. I can feel that in some areas of my life, I have grown up, I have grown from, say, 10 years ago or 20 years ago, but that actually, that direction is really the direction of growth. And growth means expansion. And expansion means range, right? So it's not that we're, going from darkness to light, or from animal to civilized, for instance, but that we're growing in our capacity to embrace those polarities, as well as other polarities, and one that comes to mind for sure is masculine and feminine, but there are many others. So our consciousness, our awareness, and I'm not talking here about a disembodied consciousness, that's floating up there, but like an embodied consciousness, grows painfully at times, very pleasantly at times, in its capacity to embrace more of the human spectrum. And that goes both ways. It goes into the light and it goes into the darkness. So some of the most compassionate people that I've ever met in my life were, people that, worked, for instance, in the BDSM scene, that their job, their gift to the world was to embrace consciously what would be considered by most people to be more of the darker side, in this case of, let's say, the erotic spectrum, but with consciousness, with presence. And that expands the heart in such a beautiful way. So if there is, any sense to our evolution, my suggestion is that it is a growing. It's not a linear, going from A to B, but it's an expansion that can contain A and B and more range. And then on what you said about, like, do people around us have agendas and expectations? For sure. But one thing that I learned, from Gabor Mate, who is an amazing medical doctor and someone that has studied at length the working of the nervous system, is that it doesn't matter so much what people expect from us, or project on us even. But what really, really matters is the way we take that in, the way we respond to other people's expectations and, for instance, desires. We are, if you will, condemned or bound to navigate in a soup of expectations and pushes and pulls. Yeah, that's not going to change as long as we are in groups with people, in communities, in families, etc. But the way we respond to that, and that very delicate equilibrium between the excess of I don't give a shit, you can think whatever you want about me, but I don't care. That's usually a very deep avoidance and fear. And then the opposite, excess of leaning into everything and just being, you know, sucked in by whatever other people want from me, expect from me, project on me and whatnot. So the dance in you know, in the middle, which is not a 50-50, but it's more of a dynamic dance of like, okay, now it's the moment to respond to the environment. Now it's the moment to kind of like come back onto my own sovereignty. It's a dynamic dance that I feel we can all become more masterful in. And guess what? One of the most important ways to do it is to get to know your shadow. Because here's how it works, like literally, practically. If I have, let's say, you know, a very unacknowledged part of me that wants to be the ruler of the world. I want to rule on everybody. I want to be, you know, this benevolent dictator that everybody will bow to and respect. But I cannot really say that. It's just running in my shadow. So, or malevolent dictator, you know, doesn't matter. I want power. I want to rule over people. So as long as that is in my shadow and I don't acknowledge it, I will be very much susceptible and kind of easy to influence by those personalities out there that vibrate that energy. You know, so I will be the best follower of gurus and you know, leaders of all kinds that just play out that role for me because I'm unable to admit it to myself. But when I bring that energy into consciousness and perhaps play with it and, you know, like play it even in sexuality, which is a great way to bring those energies up, then I become more resilient and more able, like in a healthy way, more able to move that energy in me. So I don't need so much the external pointer. I'm not so much driven or drivable by the external factors around me because they don't have a place to latch so much anymore. The shadow in all of us, and we all carry shadow, is also a repertoire or a reservoir of hooks that smart people, organizations, and structures out there subconsciously know how to hook into. So, you know, the path of becoming more and more autonomous inevitably passes through the willingness to recognize the shadow that we all carry. And as well, the sexual fears, desires, drive that we all carry and most of the time feel that we need to hide if we want to be accepted by others.
Yes, such a wealth of knowledge here. Beautiful. And I love what you said. It's not just theory to hold it conceptually, but the whole point is that it's felt, it's in the body. So yeah, can you talk a little bit about the felt sense and the embodiment piece? Because, you know, just like we're all susceptible to the, you know, current spiritual dogma, if you will, is all about enlightenment, all about the upper chakras, and ignores the lower chakras, the root, the sex, the gut, the more animal side of us. And I love this endarkenment instead of enlightenment, and how much, you know, the dark, you know, we go to sleep at night. We were born from the womb where it was all dark, you know. If there's no sun, if there's no light source, outer space, it's completely dark. And we have more abundance of dark than we do necessarily light. And yes, you know, we've shunned it. But talk to us a little bit more about the felt sense in the body.
Yeah, so like it's crazy because, you know, again, I bring it back to the wholeness of the human being. Who would in their right mind believe that a human being is made only of consciousness? We know that it's not like that. We know that we, you know, consciousness, I'm using now this term a little bit in a different sense, because someone could say, okay, consciousness embraces everything, whatever, you know, whatever name we want to give to the all-embracing space, then as soon as we go into it, we find polarities and dualities. So let's call it mind and body. No one would ever argue that we're just mind, also not just body. But then, you know, very commonly, when we, for example, want to do shadow work, you know, the first instance or the first thing that people think about is like, okay, you know what, I'm going to go to a psychoanalyst. Nothing wrong with that. You know, there is a place for that, of course, in life. But what are you going to do with a psychoanalyst? You're going to talk about stuff, and they're going to listen, or perhaps even to talk back, depending on their school of thought. It's gonna go through the mind pretty much only, and then maybe some emotion will surface, and so on and so forth. All good with that. However, whenever we create containers and spaces where we can vibrate through the emotional body, through the physical body, and also, and this may be controversial for some people, but I stand by it, where we can invite in a way that's safe and that's consensual, when we can invite sexual energy into the space, then we're talking. Look at it like in this way. We can put a bunch of people together, 10 people together, and put them through a meditation retreat, or some other form of a spiritual retreat. And chances are, by the end of it, they, maybe 8 out of them will have gone through the whole retreat without showing any of their shadow. They will have been, well behaved with everybody and very pleasant to be around, not interfering with anyone's process, but also deep and caring and so on. Now, put the same amount of people in a space of living together or being together and doing as well, process and whatever for a week, whatever, 10 days, but also open up the opportunity for erotic energy to be present in whatever shape or form is appropriate to the space. Now it's going to become interesting, because as soon as sexual energy starts to vibrate in the space, chances are that, someone's jealousy will show up, someone's sense of isolation, someone's competition, someone's, tendency to manipulate, or in the opposite sense, outright, be predatory, backstabbing, all of that. And I say, wonderful, if the space is supportive enough and held enough and created in such a way that these energies can actually be seen without, of course, totally, leaning into them and letting them take over, then we're starting to really build a container for shadow work. Otherwise, we're going to talk about the shadow, we're going to dissect it 1,000 times and over, but it's never felt. And it's curious because maybe, I believe you probably will agree with me, because we've been in common spaces a lot of times before, but also for those of the listeners that perhaps haven't had that experience, it's very funny, but it is true. A space becomes much safer once the shadow is allowed space to be present, to be seen. Otherwise, we can all play nice to each other and everything looks really fine and good, but then as soon as the heat goes up a little bit, it snaps. When we can invite the shadow collectively into the space with awareness, then it may rattle the boat, it will rattle the boat. But then when that kind of subsides, there is a felt sense of safety, and safety comes from being able to see others more fully and being able to be seen more fully. That's what real safety is based on. And it's like, oh, wow, now I can see more of you. Now you can see more of me. Now I feel safer in the space with you.
Yes, there's this quote, a humble man versus a violent man who's embraced his violence and has control over it is much safer than just a humble man who's just peace on the outside, but we have no clue and we're not privy to what's happening underneath the surface. It's
Totally.
it's counterintuitive, a lot of this, right? And I love what you talked about earlier about how it's not linear, but that we're growing exponentially in all directions. So it's almost it's holographic.
Yeah, and it's counterintuitive, because we have built our so-called intuition on very repetitive patterns of thought. But if you look at children, for instance, and then they will have their best friend, and then at some point they will fight. Or, one will try to snatch the other one's toy and they will be like, ah! But after that, their friendship deepens. Most of the times they have seen more of each other. There is an intimacy that can only come from having seen more of a 360 degrees picture of you. And that's why, you know, also going through hardships together really cements relationships, both in romantic relationships and friendships and all sorts of relationships. You know, it's funny because virtually everybody complains of like, oh, you know, shallowness, and I have to wear these masks and I want to be authentic. But then it's true what you said, you know, like at the same time, we're dead scared of real authenticity because there is a very deep ingrained survival instinct, which is more or less like this. If they see me for who I really am, if they see all of me, I will be outcast. And if I'm outcast, I will die. This is why, by the way, shame is widely acknowledged to be perhaps the most powerful so-called negative emotion, because shame basically means I am being in such a way that I will be outcast. That's the basic meaning of it. And deep in our DNA, being excluded from tribe means death. You know, that's how we evolved. So it's totally deep, but it doesn't mean that it's based on our deepest sense of actually intuition and relationship. Because as long as we feel safe and in abundance, then we long to be seen by others. Actually, we want them to see our so-called shadow or dark side or the whole of us. There is a deep pleasure in that. So it's a bit paradoxical, but you know, it's a paradox that actually entails a lot of energy there. That's why shadow work is both frightening and deeply exciting and deeply relaxing also on a very core level. Because as long as we cannot allow ourselves to be seen fully, we don't fucking relax. You know, we're tight. We're deeply tight, and there is a constriction and a necessity to be seen only partially, because oh my god, if you got to see the whole of me, for sure you wouldn't love me, for sure you would cast me away, and that would mean death for me.
Yes, and the opposite is true. If you did see all of me, if you've seen me at my worst and you're still sticking around and smiling towards me, then wow, you must really love and accept me. Yeah, huge, really, really good. Oof, this has been so juicy. And obviously I have 1,000 more questions to ask you. So we're just gonna have to have you back on the show. And
sounds good to me.
Great.
So don't get me started.
So in
or get me started.
Oh yes, we definitely will. So in wrapping up this show, I'd love to just jump into some quick fire questions. So we'll get those.
Oh my god, now you're getting me scared. What's that gonna be?
Let's see what shadow comes out of these. So in just 5 words or less. Yeah. First question, just in a few words, what does freedom mean to you?
The openness to be with what is.
Mm-hmm. What did you eat for dinner last night?
That's easy. I can answer with one word: Korean.
Nice, yum. If you were a piece of furniture, what would you be?
Oh my gosh. A futon.
Great. What are you reading right now?
That will take much more. I mean, I'm reading so many things. Okay, one, The Lord of the Rings.
Ooh, love that. Are you a top or a bottom?
A top.
What has been the single most impactful thing in your spiritual journey?
Going for it.
Great. When is your favorite time to make love?
After siesta.
Oh, so good. Amazing. Great. So I know we're out of time, but my goodness, it's so hard to let you go. Anything else you'd love for our listeners to really know about you, or how can they find you?
People can find me in my online portal, which is raffaello.life, so my name.life. But then also on the ISTA website, which is ista.life, I have a section as one of the lead facilitators, as you said, where they can find more about my upcoming trainings and events. What else? I think that's it.
Beautiful. Blessings, brother. Thank you so much. And we'll definitely get you back here.
Sounds good. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Kisses.
Thanks for listening to the Spiritual Sexual Shamanic Podcast. To find out more about ISTA's retreats, online festivals, or to work with our faculty, see our website, ista.life, or find us on Facebook at ista.life and on Instagram at ista_tribe.